sex. That's the thing that I'd like to talk about today. And since I've never done a video on sex before, I figure now is as good a time as any. And this is something that I have as much interest in as the next person, or less than a lot, though, but more than others. And I'm babbling uselessly about it. So, my point being that it's a very interesting subject for all human beings, and it's not the same as it has always been either. The morals of sexuality have been changing over the years, I think. And I could run down, old morals, new morals, but I know where I was raised. I was raised as a Catholic, as a child, and the sexuality around Catholic morality that they taught us was that no sex is allowed unless you are married. And in the Catholic Church, you're not allowed to divorce either. So the only way that you could have more than one sex partner in your life is if you get married and your spouse dies. So you'd have to be a widow or a widower in order to be able to have sex with more than one person, morally, legally, spiritually, under the rules of the church, which I don't think very many people actually adhered to those rules, and that's why I guess so many people are going to hell, I suppose. I've thrown off all those morals, and I do not feel guilty about it at all. I think, though, in defense of the sexual morality of our religions, that there is a pragmatic reason for these sexual morals, and that is the wisdom of the ages has shown that sex, of course, leads to children, and children who are raised outside of a nurturing family environment often end up as very sad and dangerous people. As the people observed probably very early on that children that are not cared for well either die young or end up as the most desperate people. And the most desperate people have a culture which deteriorates, so that if an entire culture has children born outside of wedlock, like just, like dogs or something, you breed like dogs and don't pay any attention to your puppies once you've sired them, then you would be able to raise these animal-like people, which does not advance high culture. The best, warmest, long-living, happiest, and productive societies have a strong family structure. That was an observation that was made a long time ago, before even the written word came about, I believe. And so what they did is they said, look, the morality is that you must be married in order to have sex. The purpose behind that, of course, being that sex leads to children, and unwed mothers are desperate people in many societies, and women who have multiple sex partners breed these children who have no fathers and very poor upbringing, which deteriorates the entire society. So that's the wisdom of the ages, and that's why morality has grown up the way that it has. Now, society has changed quite a bit, I think, since that. For one thing, in 1959 or whatever it was, in the late 50s, they developed the birth control pill, which is a nearly fail-safe way of women having sex and not having resulting children, so that many people can plan their families accordingly. So that if you are a woman and you you feel that you want to be sexually active and you don't want to have to take the risk of having an unwanted child, then you would just use birth control and you would have sex and no children. And that changed society quite a bit. And not too long after that, the Hugh Hefner and Playboy and all that came out and brought about new sexuality, so that people were a little more loose and free with their sexuality because they could be. Before that, they did have a lot of children born out of wedlock, or children that were born in a more careless fashion, and it happened more then than it does now. Actually, there were a lot of illegitimate children, even through the ages, even with the morality, because people don't follow sexual morality when they're, and young people especially. As an older guy, it's easy I understand how it's always been the older folks who lay the morality down. And it's much easier to be moral when you're older, when your libido shrinks. And I hate to admit that, In other words, when I was a 20-year-old, 21-year-old man, every woman was, I was like a magnet drawn to them. It was amazing. And now that I'm older, I can turn my head away and for long lengths of time, So it's easy for me to lay down the moral law because I don't have the same kind of libido that I had when I was 21. See, and so that's the way it always goes. The older folks lay down the morality on the younger folks, and the younger folks, they often try to keep the morality, but there's the animal libido that's drawing them towards sexuality. Now that changed during, after the birth control pill and all that in the 60s and the sexual revolution. And now I feel like it's changing again. Things change fast, don't they? And if you want proof of this, I think young folks today are having less sex than my generation had. And they're having definitely less children. Now, people make a big thing about abortion, which is, the late form of birth control, I guess is what you can call it. A woman gets pregnant and then she thinks, oh my gosh, my life is about to change. I had all these plans and now I made a mistake. I should have been on the birth control pill. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to be strapped down for the rest of my life raising children. I'll have to get married to them. I don't even like this guy that much, and all that kind of stuff. And then there's another option. You can have an abortion. And of course, morality, and I can understand the morality opposing abortion. I can understand it. It's inconvenient life, and so we just sort of cancel it. And there's something immoral about that, I suppose, and people don't want to hear that. But what's weird now is, even though this fight has been going on since 1973 and all that, the fight has less meaning now because there's actually way less abortions than there used to be. So there's less unwanted pregnancies than there used to be. There's less teen mothers than there used to be. And I'm talking since they've been taking these statistics. Back before the birth control pill especially, there were lots of unwed mothers and teen pregnancies and unwanted children and abortions, for that matter. Even if they weren't legal, they had them. And now there's a lot less abortions. There's a lot less teen pregnancies. So what's happening in the society? And I have a couple of theories, but one thing is that there's alternatives that I think people are exploring now with sexuality. That is, you have your your internet porn, for example. But there's also, I don't know if this is statistically true or not, but it seems like there's a lot more homosexuality. It's more culturally accepted anyway, and so maybe that's leading to more of it. As it becomes more, two men can get married, two women can get married. There's a whole movement to allow for all types of sexual changes, sexual preferences, regardless of gender, and that's an option that wasn't available back in the day. Then there's also the idea that, of course, there's this, men are a little bit more powerless than they used to be. So maybe the high sexual nature of previous generations had to do with the powerlessness of women. That might have been part of it. As women become more powerful in the society, they're choosing not to have sex with men as much as they used to. So there's less children being born. And really, this is the part that it seems almost counterintuitive, but those places in the world, those countries that are the most prosperous, have the most abundance of food and shelter and material well-being, are not having children. It's the places that are still struggling, places that, like Indonesia's and the Burma and Africa and everything. Those people are still having more children, per person than they do, more than a replacement number. But if you go to places that are the most prosperous, Japan, Sweden, Germany, the United States, you're seeing that the birth rate is dropping and dropping. People, which is a result of A, birth control, and B, people are having less sex than they used to have. It's a new morality. It's like the Puritans used to say sex was bad. Nowadays, there's another new morality that these new generation have, that, being aggressive with women, they don't, what they call the woke culture. You're not allowed to make moves on women. You can't refer to them in sexual manners and so forth. And one of the things about sexuality, I think, is that there has to be something of a titillation involved in sexual attraction. It kind of makes you wonder what is a fetish and what isn't a fetish. The fact that there might be more lesbians and homosexuals and so forth than there used to be means that there's less sexuality, maybe, because nothing is forbidden anymore. And one of the things that makes sex exciting and maybe stimulating is the forbiddenness of it, which is, it makes it difficult to tell what is a fetish and what isn't a fetish sometimes. So that, for example, during the Puritan times, women had to dress very primly and properly and cover themselves up. You couldn't show skin. They dressed up to their neck down to their ankles, and if they showed you their ankles, guys would get turned on by their ankles. Guys don't get turned on by ankles anymore, but it was the anticipation and the fantasy behind, which is a fetish. So that being said, I have another theory, which I've said before in one of my videos. It's about sexuality, and possibly what explains the new Puritanism, the new morality that's existing these days, has to do with the mouse utopia, which I explained before is an experiment that people made that puts mice into a enclosed space and giving them every possible thing that a mouse could ever want, but except for open spaces, so that they started reproducing and reproducing, so that the area became more and more crowded and more crowded. But they kept giving them as much food, as much water, as much bedding, and perfect environmental, health conditions that they could have. But at some point along the way, when the overpopulation got too extreme, the mice stopped breeding. They stopped having babies. They stopped raising their babies. They eventually, the population leveled off and then declined. And here's the weird part about it. And every time they run this experiment, the population declines and declines and declines all the way to zero. You know, which is, you would think after they got down to like 20 mice or something, they'd start breeding again, but they don't. They go down to zero. And this may be what's going on right now in the first world today, in that there's some kind of a genetic trigger that goes way back into the species and the early genetics that triggers a response in species to stop breeding. And maybe we've reached that here as human beings. I don't know.